Hello again. So like in our last video, we've been talking about exploring and how important exploring is to our personal growth and understanding. We're exploring the topic of the return of Christ because it's a very important topic. In Matthew chapter 24, you really can't get a better chapter to address this question that we're talking about. Because in Matthew 24, verse 3, it says, "And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" That's pretty specific. They're asking point blank, what are the signs of your coming, your return? What are the signs of the end of the world? And Jesus doesn't shy away from it. He answers them in this chapter about what those signs are. Please read Matthew chapter 24. He answers them. There's famines, earthquakes, wars and rumors of wars. I want to focus on verse 34 because it's the verse that gets omitted from our teachings most of the time. And then we're going to try to define some words. In verse 34, Jesus says, "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." So, what does that mean? First off, you need to read Matthew chapter 24. I believe the whole chapter has to be put in the context of verse 34, that everything that he's talking about will be fulfilled within that generation. The word generation there, if you look it up in Strong's Concordance, it's a period of time with people. I mean, generation, we know what a generation is. Just like the generation that was with Moses. There was a generation that had to die before they could enter the promised land. It's approximately 40 years worth of time. So all of these signs that Jesus lays out for us, all of these little parables that he describes about the end of the world, according to verse 3, the signs of his coming, he says all of those things will be fulfilled within this generation or within the next 40 years. He doesn't give them a specific day or time or hour, but he does give them a time frame. I feel like that's an important piece of evidence when we're looking at this subject. In verse 51, it even talks about the weeping and gnashing of teeth. I mean, we're talking about Revelation stuff here. Christ returning on the clouds with great power and glory. Read the chapter. First off, let's start with verse 1. Jesus leaves the temple and he asks them, he says unto them in verse 2, "See not all these things?" Talking about the temple. "Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." So he's talking about the destruction of the temple. This is the same chapter. This is the beginning. This is what prompts their question. What are the signs of this happening? And Jesus puts it in the context of this generation. All of these things will come to pass within the next 40 years, approximately. Now, I can tell you, I don't hear a lot of messages about the destruction of the temple. Most of the time, people speak about how Jesus was referring to himself. You know, if you crucify me, I'll raise myself up in 3 days. Because there's other books that refer to the same passage slightly differently. But let's just think about the temple for a minute. One of the things that would happen at his return would be this temple being destroyed. And we have historical documentation, factual evidence that proves that what Jesus said happened. And I think that's powerful. It's super great. In AD 70, in the Jewish-Roman War, Rome attacks Jerusalem, destroys Jerusalem, and destroys the temple. Even though they didn't set out to destroy the temple, I think they wanted to save it. It was like a jewel in the Roman Empire. That's according to the accounts of Titus, the guy that was leading the attack from the Roman Empire. But the Jews were so seditious that they destroyed the temple completely. That tells me, and that's within 40 years, that was AD 70. That's within 40 years of Jesus talking. That was within this generation. This came to pass. That's awesome. The surrounding of Jerusalem, Jerusalem falling. I mean, it's a sad story. Josephus is a historian. He describes the account of the 3.5-year war with Rome and how Israel was decimated, Judea was decimated. It's very sad for him to even account it. But it happened in that generation. All of these guys that Jesus is talking to, his disciples, most of them are martyred between his time of speaking and the time when the temple was destroyed. But there was one guy that was still alive, and his name is John, like we talked about in the last video. John was alive at the end of this generation. He survived to see these events that Jesus is talking about. He was alive when the temple was destroyed. That's a key piece of information. You can do your own research on this, but I researched this once, and I think the temple was destroyed the first time by Babylon. We know that happened. And then Nehemiah rebuilds the temple. It's destroyed again here in AD 70. That's history. That's a real thing. We ignore that fact sometimes to our own detriment. That's a big happening. That's a huge event. It brought forth an end of the age that these people were used to living in. That takes us back to verse 3, because when the disciples asked, "What shall be the signs of thy coming and of the end of the world?" If you look up the word world in Strong's Concordance, and I know a lot of you guys are fans of Strong's, it's translated from a word that specifically means age. Obviously, the world didn't end when the temple was destroyed. I mean, the earth did not pass away. But that did end an age. It was a cataclysmic event for the Jewish people. It ended an age that they had been living in since it was established with Moses, Joshua, all of their forefathers. And that's pretty important. So if you read that and try to change your paradigm, here's the challenge. Can we remove ourselves from this picture? Because Jesus is talking to people in his day. He's alive. He hasn't been crucified. He's talking to people that are within that generation. And he tells them this generation will not pass away before all these things will be fulfilled. And that includes the coming of the Son of Man. We'll cover that next. It covers the weeping and gnashing of teeth. I mean, all these things are Revelation events. So the end of the world that we think about in Revelations is it possible that that's just the end of this age? I think it is possible. At least that's what Jesus is saying. Look up the word yourself. Study it. Put it in context of within that generation, like it says in verse 34. And you'll be surprised at what opportunities that opens us to explore. I hope this helps. This is a huge piece of evidence. The temple being destroyed, that's an important piece of evidence that we cannot overlook. What did that mean? Did that end an age? Did it do exactly what Jesus said it would do? These are Jesus's words. Did it happen within that generation? Well, Jesus's ministry was from like AD 30 to AD 33, and the temple was destroyed within 40 years in AD 70. So, yes, it happened exactly like it was. I'm more comfortable knowing that Jesus told us the truth. He gave us the facts as they were. He gave us the time period and context, and that it came to pass, because that's where, otherwise it doesn't have the same power to me. Now, I was raised differently. I was always raised that the coming of the Lord is in our future. And I mean, I have friends on Facebook that share plans of rebuilding the temple, and how the Jewish people today in 2024 are trying to rebuild the temple. And of course, if the coming of the Lord is in our future, then the temple has to be rebuilt and destroyed again. But if the coming of the Lord is within the time period of that generation, well, we don't have to rebuild a temple. I mean, Jesus didn't say anything, we're going to destroy this and I'm going to rebuild it a couple thousand years from now, and we'll destroy it again so that they can be a part of it. We have to be willing to remove ourselves from the context of what he's talking about. And that doesn't mean that we're less important. Doesn't mean that he doesn't love us. It does mean that we have some freedom, and we have the ability to explore what those freedoms are. And I hope you'll do that with me as we search through the scriptures with some of these videos. That's all for today. Thanks.